If you want to, there's a sheet, that's the single sheet that I brought today is an evaluation. Please, please, please fill that out. The only way this is going to get better is for you guys to give your input. One thing I do want to note is that this is our first time being back in person since COVID. And on top of that, we have several new members of the 4-H team, so we really hope you enjoyed it. I did hear a comment about some of the stuff being outdated. I do want to notate that all of these were reviewed and updated as far as the data goes, most of it before presenting it. So it's not completely outdated. But in saying that, my goal for this year is to completely restructure all of these PowerPoints so that they don't look as outdated as they do. But I do ask you to please, please, please fill that evaluation out and give it to us. I did not write a question. I didn't put it on there. But if you will, one thing I thought about after I printed these off, if you can write a yes or no on your sheet just in a random spot of whether or not you like the books or whether you would rather not have the book. When I say the books, I mean the actual Grassmasters publications and not the other ones. So without further ado, we're gonna talk. I'm kind of gonna bring it all home today. Now the title of my slide is the top 5 ways on forage production. And so I've given this at several cattlemen's meetings. So it's not really specifically to Grassmasters, but typically the last night is just a rainfall simulator. You eat and you go home. And we had some response in the past to saying, if you're going to get us here for the rainfall simulator, give us a little something extra, right? And so that's what I'm going to do. This, like I said, is going to bring everything that we talked about, and it's really going to outline those key aspects in forage production. So my first question is, what does saving money mean to you? And if you were here the first night, I asked you that. So I'm seeing how well you guys paid attention. But what does saving money mean to y'all?
Keeps you in business.
Keeps you in business?
Pasture so you don't have to feed as much.
Managing good pasture so you don't have to feed as much. Good, so that kind of goes along with what our goal as agricultural producers are. And again, I showed you this slide the first night. And I told you that I changed this last part, so I didn't even put the other slide in here. But our goal is to produce the most yielding product with the best quality in the most profitable and sustainable way. And so what we're going to talk about today is really going to be a combination of everything we talked about over the week, over the last few weeks, and talk about how to manage kind of in those hard times, where we can give up, or not necessarily give up, but where we can cut things, and where we really shouldn't cut things. So I'm going to show you these slides. This is not my usual clicker. So these numbers are going to be numbers from Emanuel County. So I've accessed these from several of our chemical and fertilizer dealers and just put together an average. This is from 2020, January of this year. Let's see. Yellow bar is 2023, green bar is 2022, blue bar is 2021. Obviously, our input costs are increasing pretty substantially. So what do we do? And what we're going to talk about is what's required to get that grass growing. Sometimes we get away with throwing the kitchen sink at it and it works. Sometimes we can't do that. The first I said top 5 ways, and I wholeheartedly believe in this. The first way is by soil testing and fertilizing according to that soil test. I see some of y'all looking in your books. This particular slide set is not in your books. I do have some handouts here if you want a copy of those. And I can email it to Miss Tammy too. But anyway, soil testing and fertilizing according to that soil test is absolutely a way that you're going to save money in the long run. What I mean by that, soil samples, $7. Not sure. $8 here, sorry. She accounts for shipping in her soil test, I'm assuming. Oh, interesting. So if you came to Emmanuel County, they're $7. But you got to send them off to Miss Tammy, and they're $8. But I can promise you, best $8 you're going to spend. You could spend $25 on a soil sample, and I still promise you that's the best $25 you're going to spend. Why? We're going to talk about that kind of as we go. So low fertility in the summer. So we've just run out. We just don't have a lot of extra money to put into it. I fertilized the last few years. I just don't have the money to do it this year. But low fertility in the summer can lead to bigger problems later. If we skip a potash, so if you remember from this slide, this is potash. Last year it was $920 a ton. That's pretty expensive. But if we skip that application and lime for a season or 2 or 3, we're going to see our Bermuda grass is going to start thinning out. We're going to start seeing some broom sedge, some crabgrass. Personally, I like crabgrass, but obviously it's not feasible on all the acres of your land. So this is not a good way to get crabgrass. Poor establishment of annual crops. If you're planting any kind of annual clover, alfalfa maybe, perennial peanut, anything like that, ryegrass, oats, we're overseeding a lot with that. You're going to see that those are not going to take off quite like you want them to. And then we're going to see lower yields in the future. And so that poses the question, in 4 years of not fertilizing with potassium or lime, can we afford to re-sprig? Have you priced sprigging yet? Can you find a sprigger? That's another good question. So types of lime, ag lime is the most common. We do see other products, wood ash, eggshells, basic slag. In Emmanuel County, we put out a whole bunch of recyclime. I don't know if you guys get recyclime quite this far north. It is a really good option for us if you can get it, for the sheer fact of most of the time the only cost associated with it is the spreading fees. Now, in saying that, we use that a lot in row crops. I personally do not want it on my hay fields because it does kind of look trashy. No, there is absolutely no any kind of problems associated with it for our livestock, but it can look kind of trashy. It kind of looks like ground up toilet paper. So you can see how trashy that would look.
So what exactly is that?
It's a paper mill product. Types of lime, just going through it again. Calcium and magnesium is our dolomitic lime. 80% of those particles are going to be from 1/2 to 2 millimeters. What does that mean? The sizing of those lime particles is how quick it's going to break down, how quick you're going to see an effect for putting out that lime. Calcitic lime is smaller than 1/4 millimeter. It's going to break down much faster. That's going to be more of our ag lime. Fun fact, and I always like to talk about this. Do we know what product lime is associated to in the human world? Specifically calcium carbonate. Tums. So if you could find some outdated Tums and grind it up, you might get you some liming value there. When should I apply lime? Never a bad time to put out lime. Something to think about is most of the time it takes 6 to 12 months to see a substantial change in lime. In heavier soils, or depending on the kind of lime that you've got, can take up to 12 to 18 months. Now, our sandy soils in Emmanuel County, probably not going to see it quite as much as 18 months. Up here, and even part of my land in Johnson County has some pretty heavy clay parts to it. Consider applying lime during the off times to save money. Now that particular part was really associated in a more row crop system. So for instance, basically from February until August, September, our fertilizer dealers are running heavy on our row crops down in Emmanuel County. And so sometimes it's hard, sometimes they charge more because they got a lot going on, and it might not get out when you can. In saying that, the heavy traffic times for fertilizer is not always a great time to put out lime just because of the companies. They don't have time to get to it. If you can put it out on those off times, you are going to be much better off. At a minimum, 1 ton of lime to the acre will be needed every 3 years to offset nitrogen fertilizer. We should be taking soil samples quicker than that. Usually about 2 years on a pasture, 1 year on a hayfield. Alright, so what if we don't apply lime? Didn't have time to get it out, quite honestly, I forgot about it. So I like these numbers. So these numbers are the difference between a 5.6 and a 6.2 pH. This is what we put out in this scenario: 200 pounds of nitrogen, 50 pounds of phosphorus, and 150 of potassium. These were the prices that this scenario was conducted of. Again, this is the difference between a 5.6 and a 6.2. We lost 35% of our nitrogen efficiency between a 5.6 and a 6.2, which is equivalent to about $42 an acre that we lost because our pH was not high enough. If you continue through that scenario, if our pH was not a 6.2, but it was a 5.6, we lost a total of $62 an acre. I don't know about y'all, but that's a good steak dinner, right? So anyway, my point is with that, obviously make sure that we're liming and getting that fertilizer out. What if I can't afford to fertilize at a full rate? These are a couple things you can do and something that you don't do. We can see some benefit from applying lower rates of nitrogen and potassium to all acres. Okay? Well, or we can see some benefit to applying those normal rates across part of the acres. What we absolutely cannot do is just apply nitrogen. And I'm going to tell y'all, I don't know where I went wrong in my life, but my daddy cannot stand no potash, and it drives me nuts. Well, finally, when I pulled some soil tests and showed him what was going on, he did apply it. I say that to point out that every situation's not going to be perfect. He can't stand it. He don't like it. But in all reality, that's what we need to grow successful forages. Nitrogen options. I do want you to pay attention to this particular, I'm going to swap sides. No, I'm not. Sorry. This particular column here, this is how the nitrogen fertilizer is going to affect your pH. So if you're kind of waiting on lime and you're not wanting to put out as much as maybe soil test calls for, you just want to get a small bump until you can afford to put some more out, it may be a good opportunity for you to look at these and say, okay, I might need to do something a little different this year to prevent that decrease in pH. Same thing with our phosphorus options. What's something that you notice between the two of these?
Cattle litters on them.
So broiler litter increases those. But we're going to talk about broiler litter a little bit more as we go. Phosphorus, don't typically need a lot of phosphorus. Georgia soils hold phosphorus fairly okay. It can be applied anytime during the year for established crops. It doesn't leach quite as bad as our potash and our nitrogen does. Again, that's one of those that you might want to apply on the off-peak times. Usually that demand for that product's low, and demand for spreading is low. Don't know why that put sunglasses there, but that's interesting. Less risk for phosphorus runoff late in the summer and fall. Do want to point out this, if you're watering cows on a pond, be very careful with anything that you put out during the late summer and fall. It's rare that anything happens, but when it does, you're going to feel the effects pretty hard. We definitely don't want to get a hard rain after we fertilize. It sends it into a pond with some algae in it and cause a toxic algae bloom. Again, I do want to point out that's very rare. I just have been traumatized because I saw a situation in Screven County where a man lost 55 head in 8 days. And it was not his fault. It was not the fertilizer's fault. It just so happened to be a perfect storm of things. So just be careful. If you have any questions, Miss Tammy can teach this entire series. So she's a great resource for you guys. Potassium fertilizer options. Myriad of potash, what we're typically going to put out, is not going to affect pH very much. So that's good. Again, your broiler litter and your cattle manure are going to increase it and decrease it accordingly. We want to split our potassium applications 40 to 50% late spring. I know it's getting hot outside, guys. Please don't start fertilizing. Hang on just a little bit. And that's probably the biggest take home from this message is hang on. It is absolutely not time to fertilize just yet. And that goes for planting tomatoes too. And then you're going to apply the other half in mid to late season, sometimes after your second or third cutting. This is a good scenario for you. 200-pound rate of potassium for 3 to 4 years is going to be about $200 to $300 per, and that was according to Dr. Hancock. So this one, I did the math on that at $800 a ton potassium. And so it's going to cost about $320 for 4 years. My point of not skipping out on your potassium is this right here. If we skip out on it for a couple of years, it's going to cost you about $400 an acre to resprig that field because we've skipped out on some potassium. So just make sure we don't do that. Should I use broiler litter? Get it tested before. What do y'all charge for broiler litter?
Free.
Free. There you go. So we send that off. Ours is free too, but I wasn't fit to give y'all freebie unless Miss Tammy was. No reason not to get it tested. Not one. Other than just make sure you drive a truck and put it on the back because you don't want it in your wife's little car ticket. Nitrogen, only 50% of it is available during the growing season. Phosphorus is going to be most available during the growing season. Potassium, most of it will be available. Other things to consider on broiler litter. The ideal forage nutrition ratio is a 4:3:1. Okay? Litter has a 3:2:2 ratio. My point by saying this is litter is a very good resource in tough years where input costs are super high. We cannot get away with doing it 20 years in a row. Okay? That's why that $8 soil set test will help you every time, okay? So that we kind of know where we're going and whether or not we're going to get in some questionable territory. And I did have a situation in Evans County where the man's calcium level was well into the 14,000s, and he was starting to see some loss of forages because of it, but that was all he had ever applied to it. Rare, and it takes multiple years to do that, but there again, that's why I'm preaching on soil samples. Apply litter to meet the phosphorus recommendation, and then supplement with nitrogen and potassium to avoid those concerns. So we're going to talk a little, I'm going to go probably more in depth with this than some of the others. I promise it's fitting to start speeding up. I'm not going to keep y'all all night, I promise. One thing we don't talk a lot about in forages is precision ag. We're about 25 years behind row crops in precision ag for forages. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. What is precision agriculture? It's kind of a scary word, and I'm going to be honest with you, that was not my most favorite class in college, and my grade showed it. But we're not going to get in real depth. We're going to do a brief overview. It's pretty easy to comprehend once we start being practical with it. It's a farming concept based on observing, measuring, and responding to inter and intra-field variability in crops. Fancy words, and I'm fitting to show it to you a little more broke down. The goal is to increase overall profitability. We talked about that, right? That's our goal, is to increase profitability regardless of what we're doing. And we use technology to efficiently and effectively utilize all available resources. So, one way of being involved in precision ag is by guidance and auto steer, which is the ability to steer on the desired path. I can tell you, if you like to have a cold beer while you're on the tractor, you probably want some auto steer, because y'all hadn't seen my sunflower field when my daddy's been planting sunflowers, I promise. Reduced operator fatigue. We're going to reduce overlap in input cost. Nighttime operation more feasible. Faster operating speed. Now that don't mean you can be an airplane. We still got to slow it down just a little bit. But you can increase that a little bit. We're going to see a yield increase. And we're going to be able to farm more acres. So yield increase 5 to 10% of yield. And then more acres, we could potentially increase that up to 10%. Light bar, this is probably the most recommended for our forages. We're going to see less overlap, which means fewer passes. What's that mean? Less diesel, right? Less time and reduced fuel consumption, and added benefit when combined with section control. That section control is with the sprayer, or in some situations planters. When we can combine it with that, you're going to reduce your planting input, your seed cost and things, and also your sprayer cost. Overlap increases input more than you think. So 10% overlap increases input costs by $50 to $70 an acre. Okay, that's a lot when you start looking at it. And these are numbers on the pasture and hay field. I have those numbers broke down if you want to see the actual numbers that went into this calculation. For time's sake, I'm not going to get into them, but the take-home message is by reducing overlaps, we can reduce input costs by 50 to 70%. Now, Mike wants you to buy more chemical, right? I don't, and you don't, right? But how feasible is a light bar? How feasible is it to reduce that? So, can I afford a light bar? A light bar costs $1,000 to $2,000. That would be a number from Blanchard or Lassiter or wherever. Several other companies, most all tractor companies have their own. So it just depends on what brand you prefer. 50 acres of pasture. Increase in input costs by overlap, $2,600. $1,400 on your hay field, so a total loss of $4,000. It doesn't take much to cover that, does it? 1 year's time, if you have a substantial amount of pasture and acres, you can cover that light bar cost. So it's pretty feasible. Soil sampling, we're hitting on this. So we talked about it, you got to have it. Now talking about some of the precision technology that we have for soil sampling, grid versus zone sampling. For instance, this red, hypothetically speaking, this red part would be what we consider a zone, and these grids would be considered a grid sample. We can identify more productive land, less productive land, problem areas. Do we have a low spot? Do we have places that are not growing right? We can identify those by doing some of this grid. Nutrient deficient areas, and it's the basis for variable rate fertilizer. I'm assuming Smith has a variable rate applicator now. So you guys can talk with them about that. So grid soil sampling, these are your maps. Soil electrical conductivity, we'll see those, and then our soil moisture map. For the sake of everything, UGA can work with you guys. There are some pilot programs that Mr. Daniel Jackson is doing for us, where they're taking your farm and putting this into practice. On side of that, Ms. Tammy can work with you to get some of those soil samples. We typically want a grid sample on about a 2.5 acre basis. So what we'll do is we literally will GPS that location, and we'll pull that data. You'll have 25 or 30 samples from that field. Again, there's a pilot program if you're interested in trying that, where they're doing some research on it. On top of that, UGA will create these maps for you. So don't let it scare you. Our soil labs can help you create those. Once we get those created, what do we do with them? We'll upload them into your tractor, into your or into the variable rate applicator that whoever you get your fertilizer from has, and they'll be able to control how much product goes into this area. So where does that take us? So this is a variable rate fertilizer application. So in this particular situation, you can see, I don't know exactly what product this was, but for the sake of whatever, we're going to call it potassium. So you see in this yellow area, it required about 30 pounds of potassium to be put out. In the green area, 30 pounds of potassium was there. In the green area, 60 pounds of potassium was there. In this red area, we didn't have any. So do you want to, if we're looking at putting out 150 units of potassium, because that's what our recommendations are, do we want to put 150 where we already have 60 pounds? Not at $800 a ton. And so you see that some of this can be profitable for you. And then we can do some seeding and some irrigation. Probably not doing irrigation here. Don't do a whole lot of seeding, but it is absolutely possible for you if you want to look into that. So this was the project I was talking about. See, we're going to develop those maps for you. In this particular situation, these are 4 different locations. There's one in Athens and Midville. Those are probably the 2 closest to you guys. They've seen a lot of variability in it. And so, for instance, the liming rates vary considerably. In some areas, they only needed 182 pounds of lime. In other areas, they needed 8,000 pounds of lime. So if I just go and I take a sample right here, because that's what I do, that's not really representing the whole field, is it? And so we can get some benefit from doing some of that grid sampling and some of this precision ag soil nutrient work. Forage quality, I know that Carol is phenomenal with this, so I'm going to try to fly through it. We're going to wrap it up pretty quickly. I do think this is just as important as soil fertility. Because ultimately, if we don't have quality quality forages, we still don't have a lot to give back to our animals, right? We're going to talk about this. Factors affecting forage yield and quality, species, so what plant species you have out there, fertility, harvest timing, and rain events. What affects forage quality more, harvest timing or fertilization? Before you look at that, which one affects it more? Harvest timing, right? And so basically what you're seeing here is that crude protein is going to increase with fertilization, but our digestibility is pretty much going to remain the same. And then, so that brings the question, how much of that protein, that crude protein that is here, how much of that is nitrates? So nitrates are not good, right? And so that's just the take home from there. Plant maturity, same here. We see that ideally 28 to 32 days is where we're going to maximize our yield and our digestibility. As we get older, our yield is going to increase, but our digestibility is going to substantially decrease. And so our quality overall is going to substantially decrease as well. Rain event. This is my favorite slide. So one of the things that I still can't talk my daddy into, and I understand why, but every day after 28 days of not cutting, we're going to lose about 0.5% of TDN. TDN is energy. Very important for our forage crops and for our cows. A 1 week delay to avoid a 1/2 inch rain, we're going to lose about 3.5%. Okay? If we get a 1/2 inch rain, we're only going to lose 1% of energy. What's the take home for that? Cut the hay. Now, I'm not talking about a belly washer where it's going to wash it like that erosion, it's going to wash your hay out the field. I'm not talking about that, but if we've got a 40-50% chance and it's only estimated a couple tenths, that tetherer will go a long way and still preserve quality for you. Whoops. So it costs a lot of money to be cheap. This is one of my favorite slides. I worked with Dr. Baxter to put this together. So bale A, $70 bale of hay. It's got a 58% TDN, about where we want on our energy for our mama cows. We're not going to have to supplement that. So basically all we got in it is $70 in the labor. Okay? Bale B over here, $65. I think I can get away with that. Okay? But our TDN is only 51%, not where we need it. So we're going to have 180 pounds of supplement to that bale. $30 in supplement of that 180 to that bale, plus the $65 bale. We just increased our input cost to our livestock and our cows by to $93. Whereas if we would have just spent that extra $5 a bale to begin